Hi, welcome. As such, I'm the vice president of timber services for Acadian Timber, and I'm talking about our journey implementing Remsoft operations. I'm going to call it a journey because we're still ongoing, and I'm going to go over a little bit about how things are going today. Where we're headed. So yeah, we're still early in our journey. And I'm going to go over what things are working for us. What's been harder than expected, for those that are thinking about going down this path, because I think it's very listening to the some of the commentary from Alpac yesterday, and in our experience, there's a lot of overlap there. You'll see, and what we're learning. Some next things we're looking at too, but yeah, just to give a look at what's possible and where we're at. So, um, talk a bit about Acadian Timber first. I don't know if people are probably not familiar with us. So we're located in our head office is in Edmonton. The big red arrow is there on the map, and we have land both in New Brunswick and Maine. 121,000 hectares of privately owned land in Maine. We're sort of just to the west and south of Baxter State Park, for those that are familiar with Maine. Um, we have 314,000 hectares of land, of privately owned land in New Brunswick. Um, our MB Timberlands on the chart there. And we also have, we manage a crown license on behalf of Twin Rivers Pulp Limited. Um, we used to be the Woodlands division of Twin Rivers Pulp Limited at one point in time, so that's how that relationship still exists. But we still manage the crown license. It's about 537,000 hectares. So just to give an idea for Remsoft operations, we do all of our own operations on our private land. So we're using Remsoft operations fully for the first two land bases. We do some of the harvesting on the crown land, but again, the tenure system in New Brunswick is you have the license manager, the licensee, and then you can be a sub licensee if you have an allocation and you have the right to do your own operation. So we're a minority. We still do harvesting services for people on the crown license, but not nearly the full scope. So our business, there's four key parts of our business. The biggest part by far is our forest products business. We sell. We don't have a wood processing facility, so purely a timberland owner, land manager. But we sell roundwood, some chip form products to our customers, and our goal as a company, I guess, is to be a preferred supplier to our customers, to do what we say we're going to do when we say we're going to do it, and that's sort of how we've built our business through the years, to be a partner with our forest products customers. Um, the part of the business, next part, timber services, the part that I manage, so that's dealing with the management of the crown license, falls under timber services. We do have a carbon project, so anything around carbon falls under my area, as well as anything, occasionally we do consulting projects for other landowners as well, and that would also fall under our timber services division. Um, we have a real estate. We're into real estate since about 2020, primarily recreational properties, but some residential as well. Where the opportunity exists in both New Brunswick and Maine, and leasing and kind of areas for sale. So that's a new area that's kind of in expansion. And we also have a recreation program on our lands where our primarily on our New Brunswick lands there is recreation in Maine, but it's sort of there's a third party contractor that manages a lot of that. But in New Brunswick, we have controlled access to our lands. We charge admission to get in to do things like traditional things, ATVing, hunting, that sort of thing is a big part of our business. But we also have hiking trails, and we actually have a full network of campgrounds as well that are really popular. A lot of them are are fully booked year round by the waterfront sort of camping opportunities for campers and things like that, and those are really popular as well. So we have a lot of aspects to our business, but it's purely around timberland management. So given that, I mentioned before, we have no processing facilities, and some people who are associated with the mill, they might say, well, that's great. Like, we, in fact, I would say we thought that a little bit when we first went down. We're like, we're not beholden to anyone. We can do what we want. But you also don't have any guarantees. Every year is a clean sheet. So there's that. So, there's good and bad with that. You can find your own customers, but you got to find your own customers. So, um, we're in two countries. So there's complexity to that with our Remsoft operations buildup. Obviously, we have a tons and acres module, and we have a cubic meters and hectares module. Um, and we're on private and public land. So we have the public land in again, these things need to be split out because they're quite different. In both our private land in New Brunswick and Maine are different, and our public land. We also have in Maine, there's other complexities. We have a conservation easement and things have to be tracked separately, separate AACs, all that sort of thing. So that, again, all complexities that we need to build in and manage. Um, we harvest from our own harvest. It's not the full harvest of all the land, but we're around 1 million cubic meters annually, between all the private lands and the public land that we harvest. We have about 9 species groups, and I was going to do products, but that changes. So I don't know what the product list would be, like 40, 45 maybe. It's a lot of products, and we don't do 45 products on every block. That would be crazy, but we've been in the teens before, and usually the contractors aren't so happy about that. But again, we try to merchandise, highest and best value from what we're harvesting, and if we have a market for something that's better, we do that. And we have 70 plus regional customers. So we don't sell to 70 customers like every day, but we have over the course of 2 or 3 years, we might sell to all 70. Like a lot of specialty products. Again, if somebody is willing to pay for something that's very specialized, we'll try to produce that and get it to its proper home. So to kind of set the stage for our Remsoft operations implementation, I'll start off by talking about where we were, how things were before a Remsoft operation. So, um, yeah, maybe this showing a competitor's logo on my slide isn't popular, but we have, and we still have, we use the Trimble log inventory management system LIMS, and we set that up primarily for probably what everyone else uses it for. Contractor payment was a big thing through there. Sales contract administration of did we get paid for the wood, and reconciling all that. Um, Delivery tracking, obviously, because all of our scale data is fed into that system, so we know exactly what we've delivered, sort of week by week. And also for inventory tracking, we use that for kind of some work in progress stuff, or roadside inventory as well to an extent, just to see where things are at. But that's fully, what we bought that system for was to do those things. Really, really nothing more than that, and it's worked well. The other system we have is in-house, which is our sort of, we call it our forest information system, but it's basically it started off as GIS, and it sort of morphed to be more than that, because we kept, as we built it, we said, well, couldn't we link to this, and couldn't that link to that? And then it started to grow and grow and grow, and it's very integrated. Everyone, I think, is happy with it. But it's a web-based, it started off as a web-based editor, so everything is a web, it's served up as a web-based product, but it's Esri based. And so the key part of it, I guess the part we started with, was our operational plan. And we have layers for other things too. We have layers for leases and all sorts of things. Bear bait areas, honestly, there's everything. under the moon in there. But we started off as the operating plan, and I'll sort of stick with that. So you have your harvest blocks, their locations, treatment, proposed volume, sort of indicated, linked to each one. You can actually click in further and then enter the trucking routes, and all that sort of stuff is available there too. But that's what that was set up to do. Um, in addition, I guess as a part two, as we worked on this, it was another thing we did. We built a phone app to do all of our surveys that we need to do as well. So those are, um, I mentioned here, like pre and post harvest surveys. So we can go out and do a. We don't have any mapping functionality on our app though. We just use Avenza or something for that. For like, here's where you should go and do your points. But go out, collect the points. We do take GPS location to the point centers, do the survey, and then you just press the sync button. And when you get back to the office, all of the points are in the system, and you can query a harvest area, get the kind of the volume by however you want it for either a polygon or a entire block grouping, sort of many polygons. So um, we use in there, we do when we propose blocks, we will assign an initial contractor to it, just to say, we're trying to balance it out a little bit at that end. Whether we need to do that with Remsoft, I guess, is up in the air. Maybe we should just stop doing that, but we still do that to an extent. Sometimes we end up changing it in Remsoft, but we send it that way. Um, Keep track of our block status in there, which is, again, that comes back to the phone app. People have a phone app to say kind of what stage of completion is my harvest block at. They can click that, and the data just all gets pumped in here, and you can produce a status map or whatever sort of you want of that sort of thing. And I mentioned trucking distances and routes. That's all in here too. So our pre-Remsoft operational planning, we had our block data that I said that comes from our Acadian Forest Information System, the little database icon thing there on the left. We had the price information and the contractor rate information coming in from Trimble. And then I've called this the harvest manager process because it wasn't very centralized. It was whatever um, the person who was in charge of scheduling the operations had a process of some kind where they would be thinking about things like crew productivity. They would be thinking about which blocks they should schedule when, um, and from that, they would produce a volume forecast and a financial forecast. But what exactly, I get the big question mark on there, because what exactly everyone did was up to them, really. And so we have two divisions. We used to have three. I used to be in charge. We used to have a crown harvesting division, and we sort of rolled it in. But I know all three of us were doing something completely different, trying to achieve the same thing, but and we're some better than others, maybe. But at the end of the day, someone would say, primarily quarterly, I want a volume. Give me a financial forecast of where things are going to look for the next 3 quarters, and you'd have to look through your data and produce this forecast, sort of as an update to for budgeting too. But um, and um, and it was sort of free range how that worked. So not an ideal process, and certainly not something that's very transferable either. So when I look at why we invested in Remsoft operations, I remember the first time when we met with some folks from Remsoft in Fredericton, and my colleague who's in charge of our New Brunswick operations. They said, "What's your pain point?" And he said, "Well, he said, like, I'm driving my car down the road, but he said I steer by looking out the back window." He said because, and what he meant was a lot of trends and things he was indicating for his financial forecast. He was using actuals. He was using past actuals and saying that's probably, next quarter will probably look like that same quarter of last year, because that's what it looks like. But that works till it till it doesn't, I guess. And he mentioned that too. He said, "Well, He said, look, we don't ever, like, I've never said, oh no, like I've sort of driven into a wall." Like he said, "I've never crashed the car, but," he said, "I've had to do some really crazy steering before to get back on track, because you're like, oh, I didn't see this coming, and then you've got to sort of get around it. So um, that was a big driver for us to try to have operational foresight, to be able to look into the future, to look at what's in front of us. Like I say, look out the windshield with good headlights and say, okay, I see that problem coming. So how will I address that? Versus, maybe getting much closer to it before you realize that you're going to have that problem and then need to do something to a little more drastic to avoid it. Not that again, we given the nature of our business, sometimes we have to do last minute changes, but you want those to be truly last minute things and not things that are maybe foreseeable. Um, Other thing that was important was to have an enterprise platform that everybody is doing this the same way, using a similar set of tools and steps. And and that's also important, as I mentioned, for as you go and look at succession. If someone else is going to move into your role, well, it's pretty easy with something like Remsoft operations to say this is how it works. You could even take a training and you would understand sort of how the tools work and what it's doing versus a database. I know someone had a database solution before they made themselves, and it probably kind of worked, but it's probably unexplainable to someone how it works because you've sort of made it your own over 10 years, and then you have a hard time to you say, oh yeah, don't use that, but use this, and run this afterwards. It's sort of not anything that's transferable, and I think everyone agreed to that. With that, the likelihood would be, without a system like this, through succession, someone might try to just build their own new system again because they wouldn't really understand the what somebody else had or wouldn't like it. So something we wanted was to have in this system was to have it full integration. So we don't want to enter the same piece of data twice ever. So we want to enter it somewhere, and then it will populate the other data areas we have. So that was certainly added complexity, but we went through that. And the last thing, we involved our finance people in this build, I guess, so that we have finance system integration. We don't want to have a separate process that takes someone weeks to do their financial forecasting. It should just be literally just go get the BI report, and the financial forecast is already done, ongoing. They may need to remind people a little bit to say, "Hey, are you sure you got everything cleaned up? Because I'm about to do the forecast here." So, but yeah, that's the goal, and that's what we wanted. So if we move ahead now, we've got we're using Remsoft operations, and the way our data is structured now is we've linked our Acadian Forest Information System with our Trimble system. I mean, they're both sort of SQL based, so it wasn't really that difficult to link them. Um, there were difficulties; they were mostly people difficulties, and I'll get into that in a minute. But we linked those together. Um, we use an API, REST API, to then feed the merge, because we need some data from each place to feed Remsoft operations, just due to the file structure. It's kind of not like one and then the other. You have to sort of pre-merge it. I called it the sausage factory when we were making it. I said we got to do that, and then we'll our nice clean product will come out and go into Remsoft operations. So that's what we're doing. A lot of merging of things in our API process, and the query sort of process we had to be able to feed that. Um, and really, actually, the error on my chart, because my REST API arrow, there should be an arrow both ways, because we can make edits in Remsoft operations, and then we can feed those things like schedule changes or crew changes. We can feed that back to both the Trimble system for payment and to the our own system as well, and we are doing that. But I didn't put the other arrow on my diagram. And then from Remsoft operations, we're scheduling the blocks. As an output of that, we get delivery planning. We get delivery schedules by destination, week. Could have it by day probably if you want it, and we can do our financial reporting. So we have all of the pricing and the cost data going in. So out the other end of that, we can say, okay, here's our expected sort of margin, however we want to measure it, costs and revenue or net margin or whatever per week. So um, another thing that's working very well is that we have very good forward visibility now, and we've um, a lot of things that I don't know if we would have noticed right away. So we can use those to identify challenges or opportunities that we might have. One thing was harvest level by species group and zone. We have some, especially in Maine, we've got two distinct. It's not that big an area, but we've got two distinct area zones. One of which has a carbon project, so obviously the AAC is very paramount there. That stays where it is. And as we're scheduling our blocks, we can say, okay, is that working out? Because we want to. It's sort of a fine dance. We want to get through the whole year and harvest our AC, but we don't want to harvest it all in like March necessarily, and then have blocks that say we need to cut hardwood out of in August because we wouldn't have any AC left. So we have to sort of balance that out. Um, Block equipment compatibility is a big thing that we can look at. So we can look at the harvest areas we have, and then say, do we have the right equipment, that we're planning to use to harvest those? How does that match up? Harvest seasonality. That's one that I think we've caught ourselves a few times on that. In that we make our initial plan, we schedule a block to cut in when it's frozen. It's a winter block. We want to cut it 15th of November. We want to start. Then we start changing the schedule, and then we look out and we're like, ooh, it's not in the 15th of November anymore. Now it's like the 1st of October. That's not going to work because it's the worst time we'd be there. We're right in the middle of mud season in a winter block. So then we have to add some more blocks on the schedule to push or shove that back out somehow and plan around it. But we can see that before we would have seen it, but probably, like I say, it would have been an evasive maneuver to adjust our schedule to adjust for that. So delivery scheduling is something that's working well. So we have we get our delivery schedule by market and by which zone it is and all that sort of thing, and haul zone, um, which means we're not reliant on historical values or averages, because that used to be a big one that we used to rely a lot on harvest distance using historical data. We'd say, well, the average haul last year to that place from New Brunswick Freehold was 60 kilometers, so it's probably going to be 60 kilometers again. It might not be. Yeah, it's probably going to come in. It's not going to be 200 because we still have the same land, but it could be a little different. And depending on how the pricing works for those contracts, it's good to know exactly what your cost structure looks like kind of before you sign it. So we have great visibility of that now. Budgeting and financial forecasting. So um, we've formatted our costs and revenues to meet our reporting needs, or the reporting needs of our, I'd say the reporting needs of our finance people. Very detailed. We With that too, we can, looking at the data that comes out, if there's a future financial challenge where sort of our revenues in a quarter or something like that are lower, you can say, oh, maybe we're doing too many fire blocks that quarter, and you can adjust that because you'll see it right away if that comes up. And again, as I mentioned, financial forecasting is an output; it's not a process, which is a huge improvement over where we've been before. So, sort of our first thing to do. So we got Remsoft. We said, okay, it's all working. And then the finance people said, well, if this is going to what we're going to use, let's do the 2026 budget with it. So we had it was and I don't know if it left. I think people have PTSD from it still, because we went from basically nothing in Remsoft operations. We were all set, and we're like, okay, we're going to use it, and then we had to get 18 months of blocks in there in 3 weeks and line everything up and make sure everything fit together. And it was a huge lift. I'm kind of glad we did it though, because it was sort of like jumping off the deep end, and we were into using it then. But and it won't be that ever again, because again, we always are going to have that, we're sort of rolling and adding. But Yeah, it was a big lift initially to get going with it. So now things that were harder than expected for those that are thinking about going down this path. Our siloed systems, joining those together was difficult. Not because we could line the fields up, but like there are people who are in charge of each of the systems that are siloed. So and you have to deal with the people, not necessarily the data itself. So um that was one thing. The other thing is, I would say in both cases, we expanded the original intended use of why we built those systems. They were capable of doing more, but it wasn't the original intent. Um, with the Trimble data, actually, I'll just give an example. When we went um, to the guy who was sort of managing that, he had in his I don't think he had a contract further than 3 weeks in the future because he said, "I'm paying people with this. Why do I need that? Like, I'll figure that out, next week before I'm getting a week. I'm a week ahead. Like, I'm just in time. I'm good." And we're like, "Well, no, we kind of want to. If we've got a 8 month contract, we want the pricing in for 8 months so we know." And he was concerned about it was details, like it wasn't unimportant. Things like factors, mass volume factors, and things like that could change, and it was easier for him to just set it up a week at a time, get the factors all in right, and it flowed. So we had to change that workflow process. Different levels of detail than what maybe we had before. Certainly in terms of our product. We used to say in a block we would do it very generally, like we'll have some, we really weren't going into full details of products in our planning. Um, when we would propose blocks to people, we'd say, yeah, there's this much. We might even say just there's this much spruce fir, and we'd say they know what proportion of product they're probably going to do, and they'll just do that themselves. But now it was fundamental that we know that up front, because again, we're trying to plan based on dollars, which matter. Costs and everything are different for the different products and the selling prices. So, and naming conventions, that's probably the biggest thing that we got hung up on, and people fought about it. And we called two things, we called it two different things, and the people want their name to be the name that's actually used. Sometimes we came up with crazy hybrid names because we said, oh, we'll just merge them together like a hyphenated last name or something like that. But and some naming conventions that were so specific that they actually hampered us. We had to go back on some because I said, this is very specific. Like, what other market uses this product? Well, there isn't one. So the way Remsoft operations works, if you have a specific product that goes with one specific mill and you want to change the mill you're delivering it to, well, you'd have to change all the products every time, and that's not fun. We just wanted to have one product, a generic product name that we could apply to many mills, and just change the destination if need be, because that happens all the time. So we got there after a while, but that was a bit of much harder than what I expected it was going to be. Other thing that was harder was details and timing. As I mentioned, product prediction, had to do that. Had to take a cut at that up front, even before maybe we've done a full assessment of the block. Then we'll revisit it down the road and fine tune it as we get a little closer. But so we had to do that. Harvesting rates. I mentioned the contracts maybe not being set up so far in the future. We also had to project what our harvesting rate might be a year from now, which we don't actually know, but we need at least a placeholder of what we think that should be based on some budget processes and things like that. So we had to set that up for sort of when we're beyond what's knowable at the moment. Trucking zones was one. That was another one. Our harvest supervisors used to set up the trucking zone before they harvested the block, basically. So they would be doing that 3 weeks, maybe a month ahead. And now we need to do it like 18 months ahead because we need to know what all the possibilities are to every market. So we actually switched that. Some people in the planning group that report to me now they do all that trucking setup ahead of time, so it's done kind of when the block is set up, and it doesn't take them much longer. But again, it's an added job for them, and it's something they hadn't anticipated doing before. So things that we're working on. So again, we're still on the path here. we're looking at Remsoft Operations has a transportation module to really you can really take a deep dive into trucking needs, and we hesitate to use it. We have very different needs for Maine and New Brunswick. In New Brunswick, a lot of our trucking is contracted, and it's, maybe not exactly fixed who does what. Somewhat it is, and somewhat it isn't. In Maine, the majority of our trucking is internal now. Just in the last year, we've really bought assets to be able to support that. So we probably need more use of that kind of analysis to make our decisions. And we're thinking maybe later in 2026 we'll get to that. The other thing that I know the guys from Alpac mentioned yesterday that we'd love to have harvest actuals, harvester forwarder telematics, and feed that in, and be able to have a roadside inventory and in-block inventory sort of all automated, but we're not there yet. Could probably get there. I mean, we do own some harvest equipment, so we have the ability to gain that data from our own equipment, from a contractor equipment that's, kind of a dog's breakfast of whatever. That becomes a lot more difficult, and different ages, etc. So I would say that one is to be determined. Couple last slides. I guess our advice to anyone who's thinking about implementing Remsoft operations would be, don't think you need to wait till things are perfect. I think we did that some. We said, and the guys that were from Alpac yesterday made the same point. Um, there'll always be better information you don't have, and 100% true what they said. You'll find out if your information's good enough or not when you actually try to use it. Because if you try to think ahead about, okay, I'm gonna like hit the bullseye, and probably you won't. You'll probably find that you needed something you didn't have, or you might overbuild trying to get it better data. So you can realize the benefits of what's available, and you can always build the system so that you can build in some improvements you want when you're ready, but sort of keep some things kind of parked. And the last one that I preached to my finance friends is to keep it simple. They didn't listen, but they're not here today either. But fewer cost items make data management and updating simpler. We almost kept our whole chart of accounts, I think, through Remsoft operations. And if you're thinking about, do I need something in for costs? I got 3 questions. Is it variable? If it's something that doesn't really change, you can just round it into something else. Or just add it on a spreadsheet you're going to use later. Is it material to your outcome? Again, if it's like a cent a ton or something, probably you don't need to worry about that kind of thing. And is it something that's predictable? If it's something that's totally unpredictable, to try to put it in here, you might need to update constantly just to try to chase it. And maybe there's a better way to do that. But keep the things that are controllable within the operation, I would say, in terms of the kind of data that you load in. The system will allow like any amount of complexity that you want, basically, for financial reporting. It's totally customizable, and that's I don't know, it's a feature, but it can be a curse depending on how detailed the people you involve in your implementation team. So